Hi, this is the behind the scenes of my film The Devil's Ballet. This BTS was made over the span of 5 months, so sorry if there are any inconsistencies. So, what was my plan for this film? It started out as being called Contrast, then A Talk of Death, then Hellscapes, and then so many other things. Going into it, all I knew was I wanted to make something cool and confusing. I finally landed on the idea of having half of it being the good side of life and the other half being evil. Let's start with the peaceful section. The music for this was composed by someone by the name of Ignasci. I pretty much just asked for something beautiful, and that is exactly what I got. I highly recommend him if anyone ever wants to get some nice music done for a video. The idea of the dancer came after I watched a recording of Swan Lake. I started out with this character who I show the making of later on in this video. There was just simply a black background and a wooden floor for the set, and then I animated him. There are only 4 shots of him dancing, however I filmed over 30 and picked from the best ones. I then committed the greatest sin known to animator by using some frame interpolation. My defense of this is that the character was moving so slow that the frame interpolation would not have to account for ease in and ease out, meaning I could skip one of the usual big downfalls of frame interpolation. The curtains and light ray were both just 2D elements that I added in after. Next we have a few CG shots. I had never touched Blender before I made this, so it was really a big learning curve. I worked out a model, texture, animate and light a scene, and this took me about 2 months of on and off learning. This shot of the swan features a swan that I modelled and textured, as well as a lake model which I downloaded and retextured to my own liking. The gates to heaven in this shot and the clouds were also downloaded, however I did make some adjustments to the model and the texturing to make sure it was more what I wanted. And in the end I found a nice mix of gold and brown for the colours of the gate. This shot of Jesus on the cross was comprised of some real elements that I photographed and then cut out, as well as a large mountainscape that I downloaded and retextured. Next we have the cutaway to the Skull Man. First I made the Skull Man. I started off with an armature from Animation Toolkit, then its shoulders broke but I fixed them. Turns out my armature was from a whole dodgy batch of parts. Then I wrapped it in sealing tape and used foam to bulk out the body. Then it just sat in my drawer for a few months because I had no clue what to do with it. However, I got some inspiration and I got this head from Amazon and designed it to my liking. However, the scale just wasn't right. I tried making my own clothes for this character and it worked pretty well, but later they were mostly replaced with some Barbie clothes. The skull is a pre-made model, which I then just painted up and attached to the body, and finally the hands just have some animation wire wrapped around them. There is also this chair which I cut a hole into to secure the character, and then just some simple paint finished it off. The backdrop was a black piece of fabric and a dummy light. The animation wasn't particularly special, just the character moving in time with the audio and the colour gels on the lights changing after every line. The voices were constructed from my voice, AI and a selection of fellow animators. They were then pitched up and down and played around with so much that they're pretty much unrecognisable. There is just one more shot at the end of the film with this character, and it was just animated and then masked around for the final product. Now it is time for the chaotic section breakdown. First of all, I made this disgusting beat. I started out by just playing around with an electric guitar, but I quickly realised that any kind of traditional instrument would not serve the purposes of this film. So I decided to go with a different route and started screaming into a microphone. This also didn't work, but it gave me the idea to start whistling into a microphone. I then took 5 of these takes, pitched half of them up and half of them down, and then put them into an autotune to distort them further. Then I went into Serato Studio and added a basic drum pattern that sounds like this. I actually made it change slightly throughout the clip, just to make it seem a bit more chaotic. I then sampled my own whistling mix, and this is what I got. Next was the buzzing sound. That is actually the sound of a guitar chord receiving a slight charge from touch to conductor. I then played this strange sort of instrument and it sounded like this. Then I retimed it to match the beat and it sounded like this. Final additions to the beat were some 808s that gradually get faster, a siren and some screaming in the background. Now that the boring stuff is out of the way, we can get into the animation side of this section. The animation was all largely inspired by Mad God by Phil Tippett, which has got to be one of my favourite movies. There is the base idea of chaotic things happening, however there is also a kind of story I made up just for a bit of fun. This character commits homicide, he is then sent to burn in hell for his crimes, then he escapes and runs away before being captured once again. This character has a wireframe which I then covered in a generous amount of string. Let's start with the first shot in this sort of sequence. This was achieved by pointing one light at the characters and slightly overlapping them to account for the perspective change that would be created by a single light source. The window and table were then modelled in Blender and added into the scene. Next, our character burns in hell. Wow, never thought that would be a sentence I could say and it made sense in context. I started by positioning my character in front of a black backdrop and tying his hands to a bar with some string. A piece of green card was then positioned behind him to help with the editing process later. He was then animated and the background was replaced by fire and mountain assets. Then we have him running away from hell, which used a projected background which I moved slightly every frame. I then just changed the lighting on him as the shot progressed to make it look like he was actually moving through his environment. Then I downloaded this archway from the CG model trader, gave it a new texture, and animated a camera to follow the action of the animation plate. The final two shots of this sequence were really simple. I just animated the character crawling along some ground clay, and then added some fiery effects. A neat trick I picked up while working on this, which helps to add texture to otherwise boring shots, is adding a still image on a blending mode to project over the animation plate. It just helps to make it more interesting. Then there are just two more shots which were not really part of the story. This one shot was using the same swan model that I modelled for the previous swan shots. I then changed the colour of the background and then just ran a simple explosion sim on it. The Jesus growing horn shot was comprised of a few simple still images that I captured of the cross and the character. Then I downloaded and lit a 3D mountain environment and rendered that out. And I just put all of those elements together. The actual horns themselves were animated in Krita, which is a 2D animation software, and then they were just placed on top. A nice detail that I added that I don't imagine anyone will ever notice, but I thought it was cool, was the way the clouds moved in these two shots. In the calm section, which represented what people think art should be, the clouds were moving from right to left. In this sequence they move from left to right. In film theory, when the character moves from right to left, the story is digressing. However, when they move from the left side of the screen to the right side, the story is progressing. This was just a simple thing I added to make it feel like this is a more progressive form of art. And that is it for the chaotic section of this video. So that is it for the behind the scenes of this film. Thanks for watching all the way. It was probably pretty boring, but you know, I've got more stuff on the way, so please subscribe to see that whenever it eventually comes out. Thanks.